Picture the city of Rome at the dawn of its glory, its streets bustling with ambition, its marble columns soaring under the ever-watchful eyes of the gods. Among the swirling crowds and the cacophony of politics, one figure moves with deliberate confidence: Marcus Licinius Crassus. Not born into the highest ranks of aristocracy, but sculpted by the fires of political upheaval, he emerges as a man whose every action pulses with an unquenchable hunger. For wealth, for acclaim, for dominance. You watch as Crassus navigates the fragile corridors of power during Rome's chaotic Sullan era, his eyes ever searching not just for opportunity, but for vulnerabilities. He once hid from Sulla's prescriptions, but when the threat ebbs, he resurfaces, meticulously collecting debts, acquiring properties from the condemned at bargain prices, turning disaster into fortune. The whispers about his ruthlessness swirl through Roman parlors and forums. Some praise his pragmatism, most shiver at his cold efficiency. There's a relentless energy in Crassus, a drive that makes allies uneasy and enemies calculative. The Senate is a stage, and Crassus wields every tool: flattery, bribery, and a transactional charm that few dare resist. Interwoven into his story is the shadow of fear, for in Rome, one man's rise is another's decline. His ambitions are visible amid the monuments he builds and the generous feasts he throws, subtle attempts at buying both prestige and affection. But you sense the tremor beneath. Crassus is not content with being merely the richest man in Rome. He craves validation, longing for military glory to match his material triumphs. Here, within the feverish pulse of the Republic, ambition is both a weapon and a curse. Rome rewards vision, yet is suspicious of those who rise too quickly. Crassus's contemporaries, from bristling senators to calculating equestrians, view him through a lens clouded with envy, suspicion, and grudging respect. Crassus knows this, and it sharpens his ambition into a blade, fueling a relentless desire to climb further, faster. It is the rebellion of Spartacus that provides his watershed moment. Crassus, desperate to eclipse his rivals and erase past humiliations, begs for command. He trains his legions with iron discipline, uses crucifixion as a tool of terror along the Appian Way, and finally, by blood and iron, crushes the revolt. Yet the Senate, fearing the shadow that he casts, shares the victory with Pompey. This slight sinks deep, gnawing away at Crassus's self-worth, feeding the gnawing hunger. He must secure his place at the apex. He must have victory that cannot be denied. Historians still debate Crassus's inner world. Was his ambition a product of Rome's violent meritocracy, or something more personal, old wounds of insecurity perhaps, or the consuming belief in his own destiny? Some sources suggest he was haunted by the specter of insignificance, his every triumph a bulwark against that fear. Others propose a more calculated, almost cynical mind. Crassus, as tactician, never letting greed or pride dull his instincts for survival. In the flickering torchlight, you watch Crassus plot his next moves, his ambitions beginning to cast shadows over Rome's very destiny. His story is not only of gold and conquest, but of psychological momentum, a man caught in the undertow of his own aspirations, swept forward toward legendary peril. Tomorrow's alliances and betrayals, the coming collision with East and West, all shimmer just beyond his grasp. Partnership and rivalry with Caesar and Pompey. Rome's political landscape churns with ambition, each man's grasp twisting the fate of the Republic. Into this turbulent arena steps Crassus, his wealth shimmering like a sword in the darkness, attracting allies, and pulling forth adversaries from the shadows. You track his eyes, quick and calculating as he studies two looming figures: Gaius Julius Caesar, the tornado of wit and charm, and Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, the conqueror who moves with effortless gravitas. Together these three form a secretive, volatile pact, the first triumvirate. The pact is born not just from shared interests, but from necessity and mutual suspicion. Crassus envies Pompey's military laurels and resents the Senate's favoritism, while he regards Caesar with a wariness edged by kinship. They are, after all, tied by family and debts. At dusk, in whispered meetings hidden from Rome's disapproving gaze, Crassus's voice is a studied calm, proposing, a little too smoothly, how the three of them can rule more securely together than apart. Each knows that trust is thin, power is temporary, and alliances dissolve the moment self-interest dictates. The cities and provinces function as chessboards, Crassus wins lucrative tax farming contracts for his allies. Pompey is granted commands and settlements for his veterans. Caesar, ever the master of optics, secures the legions necessary for his Gallic ventures. Yet beneath the rituals of agreement flows a quieter tension, a psychological theater of envy, boasting, cautious compromise. You see Crassus's smile tighten whenever Pompey's victories are acclaimed, his generosity pinch when Caesar's popularity swells. His wealth remains his great equalizer, a resource he doles out strategically to maintain relevance and tip the scales when needed. This equilibrium is precarious, the Republic ever on the lip of chaos. In private, Crassus's paranoia festers. He funds Caesar's debts, some say as leverage, others argue from genuine political anticipation. But he watches, always watches, for the first sign of betrayal. Pompey, upright and adored, stirs frustrations rooted in old competitions. Their partnership is a mask, a dance of calculated charity and simmering rivalry. Pompey's soldiers still recall the day he stepped in to claim credit for the defeat of Spartacus, sharing Crassus's hard-won triumph at the edge of a blade. Historians disagree on the depths of these rivalries. Was the triumvirate's unity ever sincere? Or did each man, in the private chambers of his mind, sketch new paths to supremacy? Some ancient chroniclers paint Crassus as the weakest link, tolerated for his wealth but never truly an equal. Others propose that he, as banker and broker, controlled the triumvirate's fate more than it appeared, playing Caesar and Pompey against each other from the shadows. Still, Crassus is restless. Power at a table shared is not the same as power uncontested. The triumvirate, for all its apparent strength, feels to him like gilded captivity, a ceiling he cannot break by gold alone. The others seek glory by the sword. Crassus, haunted by his own lack, yearns for martial legend. He pushes for campaigns, schemes to match their victories with his own. In his private moments, you sense a mind increasingly fraught with anxiety and the churning need to define himself outside their orbit. The alliance, then, becomes a crucible for ambition, its heat forging not unity, but sharper edges, deeper fissures. In the flickering candlelight of Roman villas, you listen to Crassus's thoughts as he weighs loyalty against legacy, alliance against ascendancy. The pressure mounts, the air thick with plots and possibilities, and all the while the East beckons, Parthia, the final gamble upon which Crassus will stake everything he has built. In the deep mosaic shadows of his sprawling domus, Crassus sits encircled by gold. Everywhere you look, his fortune pulses in the veins of Rome, lavish banquets, crude forges spitting out silver, estates stretching past the horizon. Here is the man whispered to be the richest in Rome, perhaps the richest the Republic would ever know. Yet this gold is not inert, it is alive, its shimmer both weapon and specter, shaping perception, breeding rumors, feeding his image as much as it feeds his vaults. His methods are legend. You picture the fire brigade, a fleet of private slaves and foremen rushing to burning buildings. Crassus watches closely, waiting until panic surges, then offers to buy the structure for a pittance. Sometimes he will save the property if the owner accepts. Sometimes he will let it burn. Rome's skyline is a patchwork of such transactions, buildings birthed from ash and desperation. His critics call him a vulture, a man whose wealth gorges on the misfortune of others. His supporters see entrepreneurial genius, a proof of Rome's governing spirit. The shadow of greed lengthens even as fortune accumulates. You glimpse Crassus maneuvering in court, securing influence through loans and bailouts, sometimes to friends, often to men who will soon owe him their careers. He funds gladiatorial games, sponsoring Rome's entertainment as both gift and subtle threat, knowing each coin is a vote claimed, every favor weaving a thread in his sprawling web. His clients, freedmen, equestrians, senators in need, dance to the sound of his coin, never sure if they love or fear their benefactor. But for Crassus, gold is never the final goal. It is the language of power. He invests not only in buildings, but in men, bankrolling Caesar's rise, leveraging debts to wield invisible influence. Historians still debate whether this dependence on wealth was a strength or an addiction. Did Crassus fail to see the limits of money's reach? Did he believe every problem, even the gnawing void of military insignificance, could be gilded over with coin? Some ancient writers argue he was blinded by greed, unable to sense when fortune had become a chain rather than a key. There is subtle, insidious anxiety embedded in this pursuit. No matter how much he amasses, Crassus is haunted by the possibility of loss. Each banquet is a public statement. I have, therefore I am. Each loan is both promise and threat. Betray me, and your ruin is assured. The insatiable logic of accumulation seizes him deeper with every transaction, a compulsion familiar to Rome but singularly embodied in him. The greater his fortune, the greater his vulnerability. Rivals and satirists paint him as an emblem of envy and excess. To the Roman mind, wealth and virtue must somehow align. You sense the unease among senators, priests, and even the mob. Didn't the ancestors warn of hubris, of wealth untethered from moral restraint? Murmurs rise. Crassus lacks the dignitas that softens the weight of power. He does not teach, does not inspire, he consumes, he collects. His pursuit of riches, some claim, reveals a deeper hunger, a void that all the gold in Rome cannot fill. And so, under the marble vaults flashing with lamplight, you glimpse the paradox at the heart of Crassus's legend. He is the master of fortune, yet remains its prisoner, forever seeking the intangible coin of respect, the ultimate currency of legacy. The city, restless and watchful, waits to see whether his wealth can buy him the one thing he has never truly possessed. Immortality, not in treasure chests but in memory. The east unfurls like a mirage before Crassus, land of silk and spices, of distant thunder and the unknown. In Rome, stone pillars echo with debate and derision as word spreads. Crassus, ever restless, prepares to march upon Parthia. You feel the fever pitch of anticipation and anxiety winding through the city's streets. To some it is madness, to others, destiny beckoning. The memory of Lucullus's and Pompey's exploits in the east still glimmer, but the greater prize, Parthia's untapped wealth, plays most insistently in Crassus's mind. He gathers his legions, their armor flashing in the Roman sun, the air thick with the metallic scent of oil and oaths. Soldiers, many raw recruits from the lower classes, hungry for coin and glory, murmur among themselves. Some share in Crassus's ambition, others question the old general's motives. Rumors ripple through the tents. Crassus covets gold more than Rome's honor, or perhaps it is his own honor he seeks to reclaim. Even so, most understand that a commander's hunger often becomes his army's fate. On the eve of departure, omens sour the mood. The sacred chickens refuse to eat, an ill sign, while the soothsayers warn against crossing the Euphrates. Yet Crassus, stubborn and consumed by visions of conquest, brushes these aside. You sense his psychological resolve hardening with every warning. To falter now would mean admitting that his ambitions had outpaced Rome's destiny, or perhaps revealed their true nature as personal greed. Fellow statesmen argue this was the first true miscalculation. Crassus, so skilled in economic calculation, failed at reading the emotional and religious pulse of his men. Historians still wrestle with the true motivation for the Parthian campaign. Some point to the temptations of wealth and revenge for Parthian incursions. Others suggest Crassus saw it as the last path open to military renown, a desperate bid to balance the achievements of Caesar in Gaul and Pompey in the East. Psychological speculation abounds. Was this a tragedy born of insecurity? Was Crassus, for all his gold, still tormented by the shadow of not being enough? As the legions snake eastward through Syria, the land itself seems to conspire against them. Dust chokes lungs, sun peels skin, and restless rumors ripple from village to village. Parthian horsemen, ghosts on the horizon, moving with unnerving silence. The unfamiliar terrain unsettles the Roman soldiers. Here, the columns of their disciplined ranks feel exposed, unsuited to the vast open tracts where Parthia's cavalry weave in and out like spirits. You watch officers double-check maps and scouts return with conflicting reports, confusion seeping into even the most steadfast lieutenants. Yet Crassus remains unbowed. At every challenge he speaks more of Roman invincibility, of the loot to be seized, of the glory that awaits those brave enough to pierce the heart of Parthia. These speeches, however, ring increasingly false to his men. Beneath every promise, skepticism gnaws. Didn't the gods themselves seem to warn him off? Didn't his own son Publius argue for caution? Even the local client kings, anxious for their own thrones, advise restraint. As the campaign pushes deeper, another uncertainty unfolds. Some sources record that Crassus was purposefully misled by his guides. lured away from the banks of the Euphrates into hostile, barren ground. Was this the result of Parthian cunning or the hubris of a Roman leader deaf to counsel? The blurred testimony of ancient historians leaves the answer tantalizingly out of reach. In the mounting heat, you sense more than just physical exhaustion. Morale wilts under dread. The psychological climate in the legions is a stew of anxiety, bravado, and simmering resentment. Crassus, 2 steps ahead of paranoia, presses on, his gaze pointed eastward, measuring every setback against the scale of his ambition. The die is cast. The desert is watching. In the distance, the banners of Parthia flutter and shimmer, an omen or an invitation to ruin. It is dawn at Carrhae, dust swirling, tension mounting, shadows flickering across the faces of men who know they may not return. You gaze out from the Roman camps, where polished helmets reflect a brittle bravado. Crassus stands among his officers, his eyes red-rimmed from sleepless calculation, his words sharp but betraying an anxious undertone. He senses the weight of this moment, the last great gamble of his life. Yet for many doubt coils tighter than their belts. This enemy is unlike any before. Across the steppe, the Parthians emerge, not as haphazard bands but as a swelling tide of cavalry, archers glinting under a pitiless sun. The Roman formation is textbook, deep lines of heavy infantry bristling with pillae, but you sense their unease as the ground vibrates, as their meticulously drilled order sits vulnerable and exposed. The Parthians offer no close engagement, no duel of equals. Instead they ride circles around the Roman squares, bows drawn, launching clouds of shrieking arrows. Men fall, shields thud, each volley a psychological blow, not just a physical one. Crassus realizes too late that Parthian warfare is as much a spectacle of the mind as of arms. The famed cataphracts, armored, imposing, relentless, charge and feint, then withdraw, their movements synchronizing with the thrum of composite bows. Through ringing ears and stinging eyes you see legionaries panic. The ground itself seems to conspire with their enemy. The discipline of Rome, born in the Mediterranean cradle, seems blunted, mismatched to these endless plains. Desperation etches itself onto every officer's face. Crassus orders advances, then retreats, then shifting formations. Each command is answered with withering fire or feigned withdrawal, the Parthians drawing the Romans into false hope, then circling back with renewed fury. At the battle's heart, Crassus's own son Publius shows fatal bravery, leading a cavalry charge to break the archers' lines. The effort shatters under Parthian missiles. Publius and his men are surrounded and slaughtered. When Crassus learns of his son's death, the psychological impact is seismic. You can almost see the iron resolve bleed out from his face. Historians continue to dispute the exact tactical mishaps that led to the defeat. Was Crassus misled by treacherous guides, as some chroniclers argue, or was he simply reckless, blinded by the urge to impress and outdo his more celebrated peers? Did the Roman legions fall because of their rigid discipline, a strength in Italy, a weakness on the empty steppe? Or was it Crassus's own indecision, his inability to pivot emotionally and tactically once the old formulas of success fell apart? What is certain is the collapse of morale. As new waves of Parthian horse archers press in, Roman shields are splintered, water supplies dwindle, and fear spreads from rank to rank. The cries of wounded men and the thunder of hooves fuse into a single numbing dread. In these moments, victory feels impossibly distant and death alarmingly near. Some soldiers break ranks, others sink to their knees. The hierarchy of command buckles. You witness the collective unraveling of an army, its order and hope sundered by the relentless Parthian assault. In the final hours, Crassus calls for parley, desperate to salvage the survivors. But rumors, confusion, and terror render trust impossible. The proud legions, once the envy of Rome, are swallowed by the steppe. Some massacred, others scattered, a few fabled to have slipped off into the east, never to return. The Battle of Carrhae becomes not simply a military disaster, but a psychological cataclysm, a shattering of both Crassus's ambitions and the myth of Roman invincibility. The carrion crows circle above the plain. The air, thick with loss and humiliation, seems to vibrate with a message. Arrogance, even gilded with gold, exacts its price. As night falls over the ruined camps, the fate of Crassus, the man who wanted everything, lurches toward a dark conclusion. Crassus's captivity and psychological unraveling. Night falls on the battlefield, thick and oppressive, not simply with the dust and sweat of defeat, but with the silent dread that comes from being hunted, not only by the enemy, but by your own failures. You watch Crassus now not as a commander, but as a man stripped of the last of his armor, forced to reckon with a fate almost unthinkable to a Roman noble: captivity. The battered remnants of his legions stagger beneath a bruised sky, leaderless, haunted by defeat. Among them Crassus moves like a ghost, his face hollowed by grief and the recursive torture of memory, the arrogance of the crossing, the bitter omens, the futile orders, the moment Publius fell. These thoughts circle mercilessly within him, every regret sharp as a Parthian arrow. He was once the embodiment of Roman ambition. Now, in the eyes of both survivors and captors, he is its victim. The Parthians do not rush. They know their enemy is broken, both physically and psychologically. You see Crassus brought into tense negotiations, meant perhaps as an opportunity to ransom lives or secure mercy. But what mercy does Parthia owe a man who sought to invade their lands for gold and glory? The meeting itself brims with mutual suspicion. Some Roman officers, desperate and cornered, contemplate treachery. If Crassus is sacrificed, might the rest survive? Others cling to the last vestiges of honor, even as their world narrows to two cold truths: defeat and humiliation. The precise details of Crassus's final moments remain a tangle of rumor and speculation, debated by historians ancient and modern. Some say he was tricked into attending a feigned peace parley. Others contend his own officers, maddened by fear and mistrust, forced his hand. There is consensus only about the psychological collapse. At the height of diplomatic tension, someone lost control, whether Roman or Parthian. An angry thrust, a panicked hand, ends the discussions in violence. Crassus, once master of negotiation, is seized, a hostage now to the fury of others. A lesser-known, haunting detail trickles through the historical record. Some survivors claim that as Crassus realized his power was truly gone, his composure dissolved. The great manipulator, whose words had bent senators, whose gold had saved or doomed rivals, reportedly stammered, wept, or even begged. Was this the true Crassus revealed at the precipice, or a later invention by Romans eager to distance themselves from their most notorious aspirant? It is as if the Republic itself cannot bear to face the idea that even her greatest men are so fundamentally human, so easily rendered powerless. Meanwhile, behind Parthian lines, Crassus's psychological unraveling becomes spectacle. The Parthians' approach is not only to conquer but to humiliate. Roman standards, a symbol of invincibility, are paraded before captive soldiers. You witness the psychological torment of the survivors. Each standard lost is a wound to their identity. Each jeering crowd a reminder that across the world, Rome can be made to bleed. Historians continue to debate these final hours. Was Crassus the victim of his men's panic, or of Parthian cunning? Did he die stoically, as some Roman accounts grimly insist, or with a whimper, as others relish in recounting? Such uncertainty is itself telling. Crassus, so careful to control narrative and legacy, finds his final story owned by others. For a brief, fevered period, he is no longer a symbol, but a man, exposed, grieving, and stripped of all but the terrible clarity of failure. You sense that, in these final liminal moments, the man of gold faces the bill for decades of ambition and mistrust. In the empty spaces between fact and legend, Crassus turns from cautionary tale into myth. The death of Crassus, gold and symbolism. Now, within a Parthian encampment lit by torches that flicker like mocking stars, you witness the final act. Crassus, bound and broken, presented before the Parthian king. The air is thick with the smell of horses, sweat, and anticipation. A hush hangs heavy, as if every eye is locked not just on a captive general, but on the embodiment of Roman arrogance and insatiable greed. In this moment, the chasm between truth and legend yawns wide. Ancient accounts, especially those who write with the benefit of hindsight or poetic malice, linger on a singular harrowing image: the executioners prying open Crassus's mouth and, with cruel deliberation, pouring molten gold down his throat. Metal hisses and smoke rises, the gold meant not only to kill, but to sear a lesson into flesh and memory. You recoil at the image, not for the spectacle but for what it means: a punishment crafted as a symbol, where greed becomes its own instrument of death. Some contemporary writers insist this is what happened, a theatrical execution meant to echo across the world. Let all who seek fortune heed the fate of the greedy Roman. Others believe the tale took shape only later, born from Rome's engagement with tragedy and myth-making. The Parthians were known for theatrical displays, for sending messages not just across borders, but into the psyches of those who would dare to threaten them again. To humiliate a Roman of Crassus's stature with such symbolism would devastate both him and the world that bred him. Yet, as historians debate, mystery remains. Was molten gold truly used, or was the story concocted, a narrative invention to tie up the threads of Crassus's boundless ambition with poetic justice? Some sources offer alternate ends. He was beheaded swiftly, his head used as a stage prop during Parthian festivities, a less symbolic but equally dehumanizing fate. The story of the molten gold persists, however, precisely because it stabs at a psychological truth. Crassus's identity was inseparable from his wealth, and his greed, real or exaggerated, will be remembered as his downfall. A lesser-known but striking psychological insight emerges here. For Parthians and Romans alike, public execution was never simply about disposing of bodies, but about theater. In this act, the Parthians transform Crassus from a mere invader into a cautionary tale. To the Romans, this fate is unbearable. To their psyche, the greatest agony lies not in death, but in the final, irrecoverable loss of dignity. The idea that one of their own, once so mighty, could become the living embodiment of his own vices disturbs the Roman conception of themselves and their world. Still, the method of gold has long outlived the certainty of fact. You listen generations later as each retelling accentuates the horror, painting Crassus as the archetype of avarice, as if the molten gold were not just metal, but the melting away of order, certainty, and civilized restraint. Rome's enemies revel in the story. Rome's own historians alternately wince and moralize. As with any death shrouded in spectacle, the truth is likely both more and less than the myth. Perhaps Crassus died not just from cruelty, but from having lived a life so entwined with symbolism that only a death of fable could satisfy the world's hunger for meaning. Across the ages, the gold continues to gleam, not in vaults, but in the shadowy corners of collective memory, gleaming as a warning and a riddle. The flames of that dreadful night fan outward, their heat traveling far beyond the Parthian encampment. You witness the ripples, as news of Crassus's death, real or rumor, mundane or monstrous, filters back to Rome. Along the Appian Way and through the marbled Senate halls, the story spreads, morphing even as it moves, its details shifting with each retelling. Some insist the Parthians killed him with gold, others with the blade. The uncertainty only heightens Roman unease, feeding both their nightmares and the myth of their own vulnerability. Rome recoils, its confidence gutted. Senators who once mocked Crassus for his lack of charisma now ponder the meaning of his fate. What does it signal for their own grasp on power? Is Rome, for all its glory, just as subject to the wheel of fortune as any mortal? The city's collective psyche shudders. Some orators seize upon the gold story, weaving it into dark warnings about greed and ambition unchecked. Others hush the details, anxious to shield Rome's honor from further humiliation. The loss is not simply military, it is existential, an unmaking of Rome's invulnerability, a prophecy that even the Republic's most powerful men can be rendered helpless by their obsessions. From the east, Parthian embassies flaunt their trophies, the captured legionary standards paraded in triumph, Crassus's severed head rumored to have played a gruesome cameo in Parthian celebrations. The shockwaves are psychological warfare, an assertion that Rome's might is not absolute. Parthia, long content to lurk at Rome's margins, now emerges as a civilization capable of humiliation as well as resistance. The tale of Crassus's demise becomes a weapon, a way to haunt the Roman mind, to undermine the illusion of their civilization's inevitability. Yet as often happens, the reality is subsumed by the legend. Roman poets begin to invoke Crassus's fate as a cautionary parable, his lust for gold, his refusal to heed omens, his failure to build true camaraderie with either peers or followers. In this telling, Crassus ceases to be merely a businessman or soldier. He becomes a symbol of the Republic's own precarious balancing act between greatness and hubris. The molten gold becomes, for generations, an object lesson, grasped too greedily and what you desire most may become the instrument of your own undoing. A more nuanced aftershock trembles through Rome's psychology. You see it in the haunted eyes of future generals. Caesar, destined for his own assassination. Pompey, soon to meet ruin in Egypt. And the many who, after Carrhae, tread more cautiously against the unknown. The boundary between wealth, ambition, and destruction is forever blurred. Senators debate new laws. Tribunes invoke Crassus's mistakes in arguments over foreign ventures or the roles of powerful men. And rival heirs to fortune calculate their next moves with a little more dread. But the fable does not end at Rome's borders. Across the east, fragments of the tale enter Parthian folklore, an enduring reminder to their kings that even Rome's giants bleed, that gold and greatness are liabilities as much as weapons. In both west and east, the story unravels into myth, reshaped each time by the hands and fears of those who tell it. The shadow of Crassus lingers, now larger than life, feeding the folklore of avarice, ambition, and tragic downfall. In the silence after the tale, you sense that it is not just a Roman general who died on those foreign plains, but a piece of the Republic's innocence, and a reassurance that even the titans of history are helpless before their own desires. History is replete with men whose inner longings shaped the world around them, yet few stories unfurl such psychological complexity or such dire consequence as the last days of Marcus Licinius Crassus. You have witnessed not merely a defeat, but the unraveling of ambition, the turning of gold from shield to shackle, and the way a single life can become the touchstone for collective anxieties. Crassus's fate reveals how societies project their hopes and fears onto individuals. His molten gold death, whether fact or parable, tells as much about the needs of Rome and Parthia as it does about the man himself. The story invites us to ponder the thin boundary between aspiration and hubris, between individual psychology and cultural myth-making. Are we ever truly masters of our own ambition, or does desire, when untethered, ensure our undoing? Crassus's legend reminds us that history is not just a ledger of violence and conquest, but a mirror, one that reflects both the noblest and the darkest impulses in human nature.